Hey everyone, this is Thomas from Springfield Daily. We are the Innovate Springfield studio in downtown Springfield. My guest today is Mr. Gary Grasso, one of the Republican candidates for Attorney General. Thank you so much for being here. So please tell me a little bit about yourself and why are you running for Attorney General?
Okay, Thomas, first of all, thank you for inviting me. This is a great opportunity for me to talk to the people in Illinois. I'm the first one in my family to ever get a college education. Went to Georgetown University, was very fortunate to do that. Went to law school at night for 4 years while working full time. Met my wife Janet, and we are now in our 40th year of marriage. We have 6 children, 5 boys, and our princess. She is the youngest, and we have 3 grandchildren. I'm running for Illinois Attorney General because I've got the right experience at the right time. We need to address public corruption in this state, and the Attorney General's office has not done that, and I am going to do that. And specifically, I'm going to look at the property tax assessment issues that certainly affect the Chicagoland area very unfairly. The papers have been full of it. It's been well documented, and the Attorney General should be in it. But the property taxes and the property tax assessment system throughout Illinois is broken. It is sapping the key equity interest of most people, their equity in their home, and we're just getting overtaxed, and I'm going to address all of that in public corruption. I'm going to address the opioid issues in this state, the heroin issues in this state, and I think there has to be some consideration also of the public pension system and addressing that in a fair way so that they're preserved for those that have them and that we have a fair funding way to do them in the future, which will probably have to include a constitutional convention to change the right in the Constitution so that we can address this and get on a good fiscal sound policy so that we preserve these public pensions for these people.
All right, so let's start with public corruption. I mean, we hear that, but
Right.
with the property tax reform in Chicago, how does that work? How sort of specifically the mechanics of why is it so problematic?
Well, it's problematic, first of all, for all the people in the state of Illinois because the studies have been coming out showing that the property values have been overvalued for the poor people, undervalued for the better off people. And so with an unfair system, there's not a proper property tax assessment in Chicago. Well, that reverberates throughout the state because Springfield ends up subsidizing, if you will, what happens up in Chicago. The other way where it's really not working and where the unfairness is that on the commercial and the industrial side, it appears from the studies that certainly there's evidence that a lot of these properties get overvalued in the beginning. Then the lawyers and those connected people and people that are in the property tax business, including many of our well-known legislators down here, come in and they have the right connections, and then all of a sudden that large value is then devalued significantly, and then these people get the savings, and the people get paid a percentage of what they're saving, and this is happening over and over and over every year in many properties, and so it's a broken system. It's a bad system. It's now being shown for what it is, and I'm going to pursue that as Attorney General.
Well, I mean, I guess something that doesn't make sense to me as someone who doesn't own commercial property. Why is it an advantage for my property to be devalued?
Well, it isn't. It's devalued, then your taxes are less. So what happens is they put an artificial value on it. Then the people that practice in that area come in, and then they appeal that, and then they get a lower assessed value. They get their fee by saving the delta, the difference between the overvalued and now the new value, and oftentimes it's undervalued, and then they're not paying proper property taxes, and then we suffer throughout the state. So it's a system that's been going on a long time. It's been tolerated. I won't tolerate it, and I'm going to go after it.
And so how would the Attorney General go after that, since that's sort of a local issue?
Yeah, it's a local issue, but and it's like politics. All things are local. No, it's a local wrongdoing that's reverberating around the state, and so it's certainly the interests of the people. You can use the power of the office to investigate, to issue subpoenas, and ultimately file lawsuits. The job of the Attorney General is to I use the word all. There's three aspects of it. A, to advocate, and you'd use the bully pulpit of the Attorney General's office to shine the bright light on what's wrong in the corruption, okay? And to propose remedial legislation, that's the first L. And for that, I think there should be laws about people who are passing the laws of this state regarding taxes and then making a legal career or making some kind of career trying to adjust those taxes at the other end. And we know that's what's happening, and it's clout based, and it's wrong, and I would advocate changing the law on that. And then ultimately, and why I want to run for this office, is litigation is really what the Attorney General does. I have an extensive career of litigating cases. My opponent, while she's a good person and she should be commended for being Miss America and going to Harvard Law School, she really doesn't have a very extensive, her body of work that I've been able to find is very thin. She's never tried a lawsuit, for instance. I doubt, based on the cases I've seen, she's taken many depositions. And so she wouldn't really even qualify, I think, as a senior associate at most law firms. She's certainly not a partner anywhere that I know of. And so I've got this deep experience, both on the public service end, I can tell you a little bit about that, and also on the litigation end. And that's why I think I'm the right person with the right experience.
Well, let's start with the litigation. What are some of the cases that you try, either by specific cases or generally what type of cases do you take?
So most of my career has been in the professional liability and ethics business. I started my career, there's a firm here in Springfield, Hinshaw and Culbertson. I was at that law firm, which is a Chicago-based law firm, for about 10 years, where I was an equity partner. Most of that was based doing professional liability, and by that I mean medical malpractice defense work, legal malpractice defense work. I was one of the first young lawyers then to help start the legal malpractice business at that law firm. And I've tended to concentrate in that area. And so I've tried legal malpractice cases, medical malpractice cases. We've done I've handled product liability cases, commercial litigation cases, insurance law cases, and some auto cases and things like that early in my career. So I have a broad civil litigation. I've not been a prosecutor. I started out as a municipal prosecutor doing ordinance violations, DUIs, and things like that, but I don't have a deep criminal prosecution background, but that's not what the Attorney General does.
What is legal malpractice?
It's when lawyers violate the standard of care in a given situation, which ends up causing actual damages to a client, and sometimes a third party, what is called an intended beneficiary client. So it can run law runs the gamut. So legal malpractice can run the gamut from a botched real estate transaction, a botched litigation, a bad divorce, improperly drawn will, promissory notes that have been improperly drafted, anything that ends up causing the client the loss has to be proved.
Yeah, if we can go back to the public corruption for a minute.
Sure.
Let's say I uncovered, or I thought I'd encountered public corruption. What would I, as a private citizen, do about it?
Well, I think there is a mechanism. Of course, there's the whole whistleblower aspect and key tam aspect of the Attorney General's office. That's when you know something's going wrong in your business and you want to blow the whistle on that. There's actually statutes about that, and people are entitled to recover. I think it's 30% of whatever the government covers. And the government, for example, the Attorney General has a whole division on this, where the Attorney General would decide if it was an important enough issue for the Attorney General to intervene and then take over the litigation on behalf of the people. So that would be one area. Political public corruption is just something you'd be bringing to the attention of the Attorney General. I would think the staff and the Attorney General would know about it to begin with, but certainly there's mechanisms within the office to report these things, and they should be investigated. For example, the reason I was down here, it's not public corruption per se, but one of the things that's in the forefront right now, and what the Attorney General has to do is protect women and the sexual harassment issues that have. I was down here today in Springfield to speak out on that issue as a Republican candidate, calling for the Speaker to step down as the head of the Democratic Party for his inactive role, I'll put it, in addressing the sexual harassment issues. And that's something that has a direct impact on the Attorney General's race, because I would think the Attorney General would get involved in this and be the independent investigator. You see where the Speaker has put together a panel of three people of his picking. How legitimate is that investigation going to be? How independent, really? By definition, it's not independent. The Speaker's picking the people to investigate himself. Yeah. So it's, come on, it's not an independent investigation. The Attorney General is the proper venue for an independent investigation, but guess why? That can't happen in this case. Lisa Madigan has put herself for the last 16 years in a situation where, if there's not an actual conflict of interest, there certainly seems to be the semblance of one. And I can't see her investigating her father in this situation. And I came down to speak out on that and why someone like me should be the Attorney General, because I would investigate this.
All right, actually, Me Too was going to be one of our later topics. And obviously, sexual harassment, sexual misconduct in the state legislature is unfortunately a very real problem. But at the same time, how do we protect the due process rights of the accused without sort of stifling the ability to do serious investigation?
Well, you have to have a situation. You start with the premise that certainly if a woman feels harassed and abused, she has to have a mechanism to come forward. And so that aspect of it has to be encouraged, that someone has to come forward. Because what we've seen is that there's many instances where they have feared retribution. So you have to remove the retribution aspect. So there has to be a tribunal, not a tribunal. You have to have an officer in the Attorney General's office, for example, where you can come and report these in confidence. Okay. Then the investigation has to be done also in confidence. It can't be a public thing right away, because sometimes when you're accused of some of these things, that bell cannot be unrung. So there has to be an appropriate due process where you have to encourage someone to come forward. There's no retribution coming forward, and then there has to be guidelines as to what is actually going to constitute actionable sexual harassment. That investigation has to be done confidentially and privately, and then if there's merit to it, and it also has to be done timely, because what we've seen in a lot of these situations is it's kind of just sat there. Okay. For example, the Inspector General wasn't even a post that was filled for 2 or 3 years, and she gets in and she's got, 27, 30 cases that she's got to look at. And now all of a sudden there's a spotlight on that. And we can't put a spotlight on it right away. You have to decide if there's merit. And then if there's merit, then there has to be an open investigation, and then there has to be severe consequences for meritorious sexual harassment. It just can't be tolerated. It appears to be part of the culture, certainly down here in the political spectrum. And so these women have to be encouraged to come forward. There has to be proper due process confidentially, but then if there's merit, there has to be severe consequences.
No, for sure. And it's a process. Justice is a process.
Yes, due process.
And thinking about unfilled offices, underfunding, I've recently learned that the Attorney General's office has not had a funding increase in many, many years, despite being a revenue-generating office. How is that impacting the Attorney General and ultimately justice in the state of Illinois? Well,
it certainly could. Thomas, I wish I could tell you I knew the intricacies of it. I don't. I'm not in the Attorney General's office. I have been a mayor for 2 terms, and I'm on the county board, and I'm also the chairman of the 911 board in DuPage County, which is the largest the largest 911 board in the state. So you're always dealing with funding issues. Government is labor intensive, and I'm a big advocate of consolidation and cross-utilization of services. Somehow, the Attorney General's office has been able to function at certainly at a consumer fraud level, a pretty high level. I'm confident that there's probably enough savings still within the office that we can repurpose much of the office. I'm going to repurpose much of the office to political corruption and some of these other things that I've mentioned. And I believe that we can't wait to be funded by the state because the state is broke and broke in, and so that's not likely to happen. But believe me, one of the things I said about being Attorney General is the advocate. I would certainly use the bully pulpit and advocate some more money if that was necessary. But again, the way we run government, where I've been, is that before you ask for money, for funding, you have to show that you've explored every aspect within your department or within your unit of government and used all personnel to their fullest and used all your resources to the fullest before you start asking for more money. I think I can do that as Attorney General.
All right. Thinking of things that are going to generate money for the state potentially is medical marijuana and then recreational marijuana. Those things are coming down the pipe. At the same time, though, we have an opioid crisis, which you've already touched on. How do we balance those two drug war elements that seem sort of to be at odds with each other?
Yeah, you balance it first by dealing with the one that's in the forefront. So you deal with the opioid and heroin issues first in this state. I was also on the DuPage County Board for 12 years, and that's only relevant to say that I was there when the tobacco settlement came down, and that money, the hundreds of millions of dollars, never went for addressing the ills created by tobacco. There weren't any cessation programs. It all went into the general fund and used for other purposes. So this is going to be a long answer to your question, but I'm going to get there.
No, do it.
Okay. So the opioid, I would be, and if I were the Attorney General, I would already be in the opioid litigation that I believe this maybe the state of Ohio started, and it's become a national thing. I applaud my own state's attorney, Bob Berlin, in DuPage County, and I believe Kane County, Lake County, maybe Sangamon County, and also Winnebago County, maybe others, have joined together, because the Attorney General has not, and joined that litigation. And I would definitely join that litigation as Attorney General. And I would also make sure as Attorney General that the proceeds from that would not go into the general fund, would be used to help job creation for all these people that are affected by these drugs. Treatment for sure. What we know is that the recidivism rate on opioids and heroin is probably 100% in the beginning, and it really, when you talk about treatment, it isn't a 3-month, 6-month, 9-month, 1-year program. It is oftentimes a lifelong program, or certainly a year's program, and so you need considerable funds for that. One of the things, I'm a consensus builder, and Senator Harmon, I think, is a Democrat, and I think he's come up with at least looking at medical marijuana as a possible treatment of some of the protocol. I don't know it all specifically, but certainly the list on medical marijuana has been expanded, and I think if there is science and medicine behind whether or not that helps anybody that's on these terrible drugs, I think it's only fair to look at that and see if that's a possible alternative. One of the many ways that you have to treat this problem. So that but it has to have a medical and a sound science basis to it. And then to answer your question, recreational marijuana is not something I think that we need to take on at this point. We have so many problems in this state that when you start taking on recreational marijuana, you're going to have to create a whole nother bureaucracy. You're going to have to regulate it. You're going to have to police it. There'll be cottage industries coming up. I know Colorado has a kind of a cottage industry of the non-legal. They're trying to. The old term I think was black market the drug there. Those are the kind of problems I don't think we need to take on right now with Thomas. With all the problems that we have in this state, I would not be advocating for the legalization of marijuana under these circumstances.
All right, and going back to the litigation that Ohio started and that some of the state's attorneys have joined on, who are we holding accountable? Who are we trying to? Where are we attacking the opioid problem as it stands?
And at least the prima facie evidence so far appears to be, starting with the manufacturers, who there appears to be evidence that they certainly, they weren't open about the addictive nature of these drugs. In fact, the marketing early on appears to be that they marketed that they weren't addictive. Okay. Now it's not only that they are addictive, now they're highly addictive. So you start where the source is, and that's the manufacturing of them. The middle market, the distribution entities that have been distributing them. And there's also studies, I think 60 Minutes did an excellent study on one of the distributors, at least, one big name company, where how could they not know that there was abuse of the distribution of this drug? They were sending hundreds of thousands of pills into small communities and on a regular basis. And then some of the medical people have to be looked at. Some of them overprescribing, not many. I think a lot of the medical doctors probably thought it was safe. They were told it was safe, and they probably did their due diligence. But there are some. So you start with the manufacturers, you start with the distributors, and to the extent that there's any in the medical community, you brought up the point about sexual harassment and doing due diligence. You have to do the same thing here in the opioid litigation. You have to do your discovery. You have to issue your subpoenas, and you have to get the information. And then where the information leads, the chips fall as they may.
All right, and thinking of other multi-state lawsuits that have been filed, the FCC repealed the net neutrality regulations back in December of 2017, and many states' attorney generals have filed a lawsuit against that. Would you join such a lawsuit?
I'd have to, you got me there on a little bit. I don't know the specifics of that, but if the state's attorneys are joining that lawsuit because of the impact that it's having on the opioid litigation itself and the success of it, then I'm sure it's something we'd have to look at.
Oh, sorry. I might have mistracked there. The net neutrality lawsuit.
Okay.
Sorry, I wasn't clear.
All right.
They filed a lawsuit about the repeal of those regulations to protect their state's internet providers. So I don't know if you would join that lawsuit against the FCC to bring back the net neutrality rules.
Thomas, I don't know much about that right now. So rather than give you a platitude, I'd have to know more about it.
No, that's a very fair answer. Campaign finance, especially on the Democrat side, there's been a lot of talk about people taking money from people linked to the tobacco industries and utilities, and just there's a lot of money in this race. How do you feel about that in terms of the independence of the office?
So I think we've already talked about the semblance of impropriety and conflicts and what the public perceives, and we're in an era when the public just is suspect about its elected officials. And so I think you've got to be very careful. So I have a personal. I'm against the tobacco industries. I understand everybody has a right to smoke if that's what they want, but I wouldn't take any money from the tobacco companies. Both my parents were heavy smokers, and neither one of them lived to be 70. My dad didn't live to be my age, just about my age. And so I wouldn't take that. The utility money for an attorney general race, you really shouldn't, because you're going to have dominion and you're going to have regulation over the utilities. I think my opponent has taken money from, I believe, ComEd. I don't think I would do that, but that's her choice. There's nothing. She didn't do anything wrong in doing that. But again, the public might wonder about that, and so you have to be careful. Look, we all have to be cognizant of the rules, and if you take money and you think you shouldn't, then you return it. And a lot of people have done that, return money that they initially took and then returned it. I'm one of those people.
No, all right, that's a fair stance. And the Trust Act and the Sanctuary State, which passed recently, how do you feel about those moves to limit the coordination between local law enforcement and federal immigration?
I'm against the Sanctuary State bill. Okay. I don't even buy the premise. No one's shown me the, again, objective, as I understand it, the rationale for being, a sanctuary city or a sanctuary state is that that'll promote cooperation with law enforcement amongst the illegal community. I just don't see how where's the basis for that as a premise? I just read an article on it, for example, on the census that's coming up. They're afraid that there's going to be an undercount because people don't even want to be counted in. If they don't want to be counted in a census, how is it that they come forward and help law enforcement? I just don't see that as the premise. But beyond that, I think philosophically, look, we live in we're a republic. We pledge allegiance to a republic, and that means cooperating with the federal government all the time. No, not all the time. We have our states' rights, but sharing information when someone commits a crime, then everything's on the table, which should include their status as whether or not they're legal or illegal. If citizens of this country they commit a crime, everything's on the table for them. If there's a warrant outstanding in another state or something, that's all on the table. So I'm opposed to both the basis of that law and the philosophy behind it, and being antagonistic to the current administration or any administration that's there. You try to work with them. If you give me an example where I believe that the rights of Illinois will be trampled by something the federal government wants to do, well, then I'm obligated to take up that fight. I don't see it in the sanctuary city issue. I think that's politics only, and we are a nation of laws, and we should abide by the law. So that's just my position.
No, all right, no. And you mentioned on your website certain well-known abuses of the pension system, and when you're calling for that reform. How is that happening?
Right. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Again, I think I told you I was a mayor, and I didn't know anything about the public pension system until I became a mayor, and it was getting difficult to pay for some of these. So what was being done by many people is that they would retire at 50, and just that concept alone of retiring at 50. But I get it. If you're a policeman and you put a heck of a lot of stressful years in, maybe 50 is the right time to get out. I'm not debating that. But to retire at 15, start drawing a pension, and then getting another full-time job, and then building yet another pension, and then retiring on 2 pensions or sometimes 3 pensions, I don't think that's right. Okay, I think you should get your pension. I think there should be really good pensions for police and firemen. After all, there are Type A, there are first responders. I'm a chair. I chair the 911 board in DuPage County, so I have a lot of respect for my first responders and what they do and put their lives on the line. And they should get great pensions, and those pensions should be secured and paid for. But getting a 3% kicker forever. I think that has to be looked at. That's a long-term commitment. Getting spikes before you, in some of the systems, you're allowed to spike. That becomes a long-term commitment, and so I don't think those are appropriate.
All right, and obviously the state has a legal and moral obligation to help in education, to help disabled students.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, that's no question there.
Mm-hmm.
And to help struggling students. But given that the law says the development of all persons to the limits of their capabilities, that's actually the language in the state constitution.
Okay.
Does the state have an obligation towards elite students and gifted students to the same degree that we have for those who are disabled?
Well, so you're talking philosophy versus law here a little bit. So the law doesn't say so. The law is to protect. And as a premise in law, people get together in government to protect those that need the protection, those that are disabled, those that are not as fortunate. So the premise is, sure, the Constitution is there. And our resources, to the extent that we have them, have to be given to them. Certainly we want to encourage the the best and the brightest to do the best and do the brightest work. And we also want to encourage them to stay in Illinois, by the way. And that isn't happening. That isn't happening from what I'm told. And that's an asset drain that even a great state like Illinois can't afford over time. So from a constitutional standpoint, we have to protect the less fortunate. From a philosophical standpoint, assuming there's money for that, then they certainly should be encouraged and that should be developed. But again, we have so many problems in this state. I would like to take care of our underprivileged first, and it's a little bit more of a wish list to protect and promote the best and the brightest. Though you must appreciate that that's something we should be doing for a long-term future of Illinois.
Yeah, there's so much to do.
There is.
We could just have a wish list all day.
Yeah, and right, and that's the government can't be in the wish list business, and we just can't. Can we get private partnerships? And I think that's where you see it. Foundations will help they certainly come out and help the underprivileged, but maybe there should be some more advocacy to get them to have some programs for the best and the brightest.
All right. Now, again, going to the philosophy, you're running as a Republican. You are. Is the Attorney General a partisan office? Does party politics impact the Attorney General, and should it? And I guess, does that even mean anything?
Well, of course, it isn't a partisan. You're there to protect children, women, the elderly. There are specific groups of people. Obviously, that's not partisan. The state is very partisan. Where the public corruption lies appears to be in the hands of one party. And to the extent that it's not going to be partisan on my part, but it's going to go to where the facts lead. And I think that that will lead to what will be perceived as somewhat partisan, but it's not a partisan. It's not a partisan office, and it's not a partisan objective. We've got to get the partisan politics out of it. I'm just going to give you a little anecdote. When I was elected mayor, the papers asked me what I wanted to achieve. What was my goal? I think that was a question. I said my principal goal was not to vote. And people were like, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, mayors don't vote unless there's ties. Most mayors." So I didn't want to be breaking ties. I wanted consensus. And obviously local politics isn't partisan, but people come with different views, and that's what partisan politics are, right? Different views. And so you have to deal with that partisanship, and compromise is not a bad word sometimes, and consensus building is not a bad word, because in consensus you educate others and to your point of view, or they educate you to their point of view, and you try to reach a common ground for the common good. I'd like to think I'm going to bring that philosophy to the Attorney General's office, and it certainly shouldn't be partisan. My tracking wrong, I will go after it as the Attorney General.
All right. And you are in a contested primary.
I am.
Why are you the candidate for the job?
For the conversation we just had, Thomas, my opponent, again, a good person. She should be commended for the things that she's done, but she should also be held for what she hasn't done. She does not have a body of litigation experience. She hasn't, for example, has never tried a case. I'd be awful. I would think that if I was a big litigator in the Attorney General's office, a division chief or something, and I wanted to go in and talk to the Attorney General, I'd like to think that he or she had at least the experience I have. My opponent will not have that experience. I can't find that she has filed an appearance in anything more than about 15 cases in 10 years. That's not a big body of work for someone that's been out of work, out of law school, even a great law school, for 10 years. I have that resume. On the administrative side, you're also going to be running a large office, the second largest, I think, law firm, basically public law firm in Illinois. I have been there. I've been a mayor. I'm the chairman of the 911 board. I'm on the DuPage County board. I've sat on the Board of Health. I've had a long history of success in where I've been and leadership style, and I have that too. And my opponent, I don't believe has been elected to office before. I don't think she's run any organizations, and she can't bring that to bear either. So it's not a good person, bad person. It's not a character thing at all. She's again a good person, but you have to look at my legal history and my legal resume and my body of work and her and my administrative and public service background and just compare it to hers. And I think when you do that, I'm clearly the one that's more qualified. And that's why I'd ask the people to put me in that office, especially now, because we need someone with the right experience at the right time. And this is the right time to go to address the ills that I think the state needs to address.
All right. And your primary is March 20th.
Yes.
And primaries often have very low turnout. What would you say to a moderate or to an independent, somebody who's not really a card-carrying Republican? Why should they pull the Republican ballot?
Because in my situation, I think you've got a clear choice. I'm not taking a position in the governor's office, but I think there's a clear choice there. Also, two very different philosophies there. And in my race, I think you have two very different levels of experience. And so I would be confident that a moderate or an independent who would pull a Republican ballot would vote for me, and so I would encourage that.
All right, well, thank you very much. This has been Gary Grasso, a Republican running for Illinois State Attorney General. Your primary again is?
March 20th.
And
early voting, I think, starts many different times, but certainly about March 5th.
All right, well, thank you so much for being here.
Thomas, thank you very
This has
much.
been great. And
okay.
This has been Thomas Clatterbuck for Springfield Daily Radio.
Thank you.